Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, October, 24th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. I want to commend to you our 80th anniversary issue, which will be in your mailboxes next week or the week after, but which is available online to all subscribers and everybody who would wish to subscribe. We have some really wonderful stuff in there, including our own Christine Rosen on the danger of trans. I have a colloquy with Dan Senor on what it's been like to provide regular commentary through podcasting for supporters of Israel after October 7th and what that experience was like. We have a great piece by Jonathan Shanzer on the challenges facing Israel in the wake of the conclusion of the 2-year hostilities between Israel and Hamas, and a really brilliant review of Ben Shapiro's new book by Irina Velitskaya. All kinds of wonderful stuff that right now I can't bring to mind. I don't have it right in front of me, but that's their commentary 80th anniversary issue. Please check it out. And the person who is responsible for helping me put that issue out is, of course, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Does that while Seth Mandel, our senior editor, is laboring daily on the website. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And then, of course, Christine Rosen, author of her monthly social commentary column that I just mentioned. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John. And can I give a shout out to Seth's piece from, I believe, yesterday about genocide, which is on the website. It's fantastic, and everyone should read it. It's a really great piece.
Thank you.
I sent it all around. Since I'm not on social media, I like old school send it around on email. So
that's old school, sending it around on email. If you're really old school, you would be printing it out, clipping it, folding it, stapling it, putting it in an envelope and sending it to your sons at college.
Yes, there we go.
That's what
like the clippings.
That's what old school is, or putting it on your refrigerator with a magnet. Nobody's doing anything like that anymore. So it's interesting. Trump blots out the sun. There is no news in America outside of Trump news. I mean, there is news. There's like this gambling scandal, which indicates that all of professional sports is about to be destroyed by the fact that there is now open and legalized betting everywhere in America, because how we're ever going to be able to trust that any game that is being played fairly, and that the players on the field aren't themselves taking advantage of DraftKings or whatever, or some system to play DraftKings. I don't know how that genie is ever going to be put back in the bottle, and that this scandal is so it's like a tip of the iceberg. Or you can't. It's hard to believe that it's just the Portland Trailblazers and this one guy in the Miami Heat who were involved in this kind of activity. It's just too rich. It's too easy. It's too controlled, and so enjoy your sports while you can, because basically the only way to handle this is going to be to have AI players playing with AI, referees, and you'll be able to sort of have avatar players that you pick in your fantasy football leagues, and there will be no live sports. There will only be, it'll look live. Sora makes everything look live, but it's not going to be live. And you think I'm kidding? Let's see where we are in 2033 once all of this shakes.
It's a reminder of the Tim Donaghy scandal, right? The last NBA betting NBA doesn't have a lot of famous betting scandals, but the last famous NBA betting scandal was a ref who was caught up in all this, and he was the crux of the scam was that he was helping people cover the spread, and that was what. So he was orchestrating. In other words, he was orchestrating games from front to back in such a way that he had the spread in mind, not just who would win or who would foul out or something like that.
This is exactly why this genie is out of the bottle and can never be put back in, because betting is theoretically infinite. It's like a craps table. If you've ever played craps, there are 50 different kinds of bets you can bet on any given card. It's not, do you get, it's not roulette. It's like, does your number come up or does it not come up? There are side bets. You can bet, you can hedge a bet, you can bet against the line, you can bet, you can bet on the come, you can bet it, whatever. There's, all these
You can bet
different
on the
bets.
coin flip. You can bet on anything.
Yeah, but so that there are infinite numbers of ways in which you can affect the result or outcome of something that will satisfy a bet. And if you have some system where you have a computerized purchase of DraftKings bets on some line or other, just not making the spread is one thing. You can sort of bet on whether or not there's, I don't know, like 3 foul balls in a row, or two balls in a row. Like, you can bet on anything, as Guys and Dolls would have it. Nathan Detroit tries to get Sky Master. Sky Master says somebody once tried to bet him that a raindrop would, that a raindrop would roll down the window, and bet on that or something like that. But, so you could bet on anything, and so if you can have 1,000 different kinds of bets, you can have 1,000 different kinds of scams.
But this is why the digitization of the online form of it is so dangerous, and actually a lot of kids have gotten into big trouble. That's a huge problem in junior high and high schools with kids doing online sports betting. Gambling is a vice, or we used to see it as a vice for a reason. And it was a vice that did still require you to go someplace and place a bet. You actually had to leave home, go place a bet and do it in that, or go to the track, or go to I had a really kind of wastrel uncle who almost ruined the family business with betting on the Greyhounds in Florida. So it's pernicious, even when you don't have the ability to do it on demand in a moment in your pocket at any single moment of your day. But I think it is utterly destructive. And I mean, I've had some of our listeners have written me saying, why are you guys advertising online sport? I guess people get served up some online sports gambling ads, even of our podcast, but it is an incredibly pernicious thing. It's doing to a vice that used to be limited to a certain number of people what porn did to sort of sex, which is just completely transform how many people consume this form of pleasure. Because a little gambling in small measure can be a pleasurable experience, but what we've done to gambling thanks to the internet and smartphones is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to a bingo parlor in a small town and buy 12 boards, and then and you can win $40, or and it costs you $12 to buy the boards. And
I play poker for quarters and pennies with my neighbors.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun, but
yeah.
Right. But all you have to do is go when you gamble live, there's something else that you see, right? Which is the effect that it has on people and the communities and who it attracts and all that other stuff. In other words, it can be a sort of, in its own way, a scared straight moment. We had, my friends and I'm from South-ish Jersey. I always say Lakewood. And so, we would go down to Atlantic City. And if you went to Atlantic City, you wouldn't say, boy, I'd love for this to be my town. I'd love for my town to look like this. I'd love for, it feels like a meeting. It feels like a destination for vice, which is what it is. And then you leave and you want to feel like you're leaving it behind, even though you're not necessarily doing anything, illegal or slimy. I mean, you could be just playing poker at a table. There is a feeling when you went to Atlantic City and experienced, a night in Atlantic City, and you came home, you wanted to sort of wash that off of you. And I think that's the fact that you could take out your phone and do it is there's no feeling of like, I something feels kind of wrong about this, or there's a reason that I'm going to this one place to do it and then coming home, and that I wouldn't want this around, where I live and all that other stuff.
There's also now this millions and millions of this crypto obsessed cohort, especially young people, but not exclusively them. They sort of live in a virtual casino at all times, and that is obviously unhealthy, but is also another sort of mainstreaming route to gambling that gets in the culture.
Well, look, I mean, there's crypto before crypto. there was the world of the 35-year or 25-year bull market, from 1983 to 2008, when so that is 25 years, right? Not 35 years. Back to Math Corner here at the Commentary Podcast.
That should definitely come with a warning.
So of course you had this massive acceleration in stock valuations in the 90s and the 2000s, and you had tens of millions of people doing day trading every day, which is essentially like being in a virtual casino in some ways, though your odds were better just because a rising market is a rising market. And then of course people were wiped out. Like, again, tens of millions of people had their savings or whatever they were counting on wiped out. I'm not even talking about people who were, had their 401ks and stocks and all that. I mean, people who were spending a good deal of their time daily trying to play the market. And so we know of the destructive impact of something like that, which isn't even gambling per se, because it's not betting sheerly on luck, it's not, or, playing some in sports, you're like trying to calculate whether a team is going to win or lose. But I think here in the what I'm saying is that there are interesting knockoff consequences to these kinds of things. And of course, betting, gambling, the universalization of gambling, it is like a free speech quote. Like, it's a kind of we're a self-governing society. Adults should be allowed to do what it is that they want to do. It's a victimless crime, and it's not like prostitution where you have lots of people on all sides of the transaction. Very hard to make the case that adults shouldn't be allowed to gamble if they want to gamble. And we sort of had this compact that, right, you would only go to a couple of places in America to gamble, right? There was Vegas, and then there was Atlantic City. Everywhere else was kind of illegal, or you had off-track betting in some places and racetracks, and then that was kind of it. And then the Native American, the reservations started opening up with gambling, and then the boats, where you could gamble and stuff like that. And now, obviously, you can sort of gamble anyway. But the
and all digital casinos too opened up.
Yeah, and so
the machine gambling is insanely addictive. Yeah. Can I actually, because another gamble that paid off for someone is linked to, because Abe brought up crypto, that President Trump just pardoned the guy who was convicted and served time for running one of the biggest crypto exchanges. And this, we don't have to get into the details of that, although that particular crypto exchange was linked to, moving funds for groups like Hamas and other terrorist organizations. It's that, once again, my other hobby horse besides the public sector unions is the reforming the presidential pardon power. And I think this is another example where Trump was lobbied. He has his family, his extended family, has financial interest in obviously in crypto, and as do many of his advisors. And this guy heavily lobbied to have himself pardoned and succeeded. So here's another example where, and I would put the January 6th pardons under this. I'd put all the blanket pardons that Biden did on his way out the door of his family and of many felons. I would love Congress to take this up, because I think the American people, every time one of these stories comes out, sort of shakes their head and go, how is this possible? So this was just another data point that I noticed in today's headlines.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to. So when I said Trump blots out the sun, it's like the amount of news that is made by this president on an hourly basis is beyond anything that we've ever seen before. So, like, 1 hour he's pardoning the head of Binance, or one day he's pardoning George Santos, the next day he's pardoning the head of Binance. The East Wing is being is being torn down, and a ballroom is replacing it. He announces that he is suspending trade talks with Canada because he's angry that the provincial government of Ontario made an anti-tariff commercial using, it's interesting, using a radio address by Ronald Reagan, in which it looks like AI took a picture of Reagan in a kind of lumberjack shirt reading a radio address script, but the mouth, it's not really that script. And they edited the speech, and somebody at the Reagan Foundation says that it's a misrepresentation of the speech, doing some favor for the Trump people, because it was clearly a reflection of how Reagan felt about tariffs. Not that Reagan himself didn't use tariff. Every president will, of necessity, make political use of tariffs to help his party. It happens. No one's pure, and Reagan wasn't pure, and nobody's hands are clean. But that Trump would announced that he was suspending this effort to negotiate with Canada on tariff policy because he was offended by a commercial that wasn't even made by the central government. That's where, like, I'm awash in admiration for what he did, with Hamas and Gaza and the things that are going on there. And then he turns around and he acts like a psychopath. I mean, like a mad king. Not that I'm saying that no kings, but
he also withdrew. He also said he's not going to send troops into San Francisco after all, because someone he likes gave him a call and said it's not needed. Benioff.
Right. Well, there's that, and then there's the good part. That's why it's so. Then also, he's decided that he's mad at Putin. He keeps having phone calls with Putin, and Putin says what he wants him to hear on the phone call, and then they finish the phone call, and then Putin, attacks civilian sites in Ukraine. So then this week, while he's behaving like a psychopath on the pardon power, he then adjusts American policy toward Ukraine in a direction that I think is helpful and proper and right, and not far enough, but loosens the restrictions on how far the Ukrainians can fire into Russian territory, and is now sanctioning the two largest Russian oil companies to put the squeeze on. This is a proper use in some ways of executive power or executive authority, because what he is trying to harmonize it or align it with American foreign policy, and American foreign policy should not welcome the destabilization of the world in the form of Russia's effort to swallow up portions of a sovereign country right next to it. The ramifications of that, should Russia's Ukraine behavior stand and not be opposed, for the rest of the century, will be catastrophic. So it's like you can't even. It's like you go up and you go down. You go up and you go. It's like everything is. It's not only an emotional roller coaster. It's a policy roller coaster. It's a behavioral roller coaster. And, like no other politician in America can get any purchase, not that they're trying to. But, like 40 years ago, there were combatants in American politics. Like right now, J.B. Pritzker is trying to be the combatant against Trump, or, Mom Donnie's like, I'm going to face down Trump or whatever. But, like Robert Byrd, the Senate majority, was a serious irritant to the White House. Knew everything there was to know about about sort of process on Capitol Hill, and how you could gum up the works as a senator, master of the Senate, terrible person, Ku Klux Klansman, like not an admirable person at all, but jealous of senatorial prerogatives, and was like a worthy opponent of the executive branch wanting to do anything and everything. There were senators and congressmen who ran committees. You knew people knew their names, knew they were involved themselves in policy matters. They did oversight. Nobody is anybody. Like there is nobody unless you're making lunatic statements about crazy things like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Nobody counts. Nobody is like in any kind of a position to do battle. Now, maybe if Democrats weren't in the minority in both the House and the Senate majority leader and the House, the House Speaker of the House would be like worthy opponents or have the stature to fight. So maybe it's a condition of the moment, but I don't remember this kind of imbalance in American politics before, in which everything focuses on one person. Maybe the first 6 months of the Obama administration, maybe, or maybe the first 6 months after 9/11, when Bush, when with the Senate and the House's involvement, restructured the American government.
But it wasn't dominated by Bush's personality. And I think that's where like Trump's true, it's a feature, not a bug, that he's the disruptor in chief. And sometimes that shakes out for the good of the country. I think, as you say, certainly in dealing in the Middle East and hopefully in Russia, if he remains consistent. But we've seen him go back and forth depending on mood and discussions. He's about to go to Asia, and he might or might not meet with Xi. And Xi seems to have figured out this fact about Trump and is working that angle very heavily. So the fear is always with Trump that he doesn't see the bigger long-term picture. He's kind of in the moment, and that skill can be extremely useful in negotiating deals and dealing with difficult leaders and certainly disciplining his own party. But it is it's why it's so frustrating. I was reading, actually, Seth Dillon had a great piece in the Free Press the other day about why people, if you're a conservative, you actually do need to continue to have point out enemies on the right. This idea that we all have to be cohesive. He contrasts that in particular with MAGA world, where anything Trump does is fine, even if the week before he did the opposite. And Seth was like, no, I'm not on board with that. And I completely agreed with his piece. But the thing is, we do also point out when Trump is successful, and that drives the other side crazy too. So I do feel like sometimes there's like 4 or 5 of us on a little island just trying to point out the things that are principled and good and the things that are bad, and, let it all shake out. But
it's the Larry Tate-ification of the Republican Party. Larry Tate, a character on the TV show Bewitched, Darren's boss, and one of the great TV sort of supporting characters, because the point about him was that he was entirely situational, and all he wanted to do was please the client of the advertising agency. So, something would happen, and Darren would have to come up with a slogan to cover his wife's witchcraft, and he would come up with some slogan, and then the client would say, well, I'm just astonished. And Larry Tate would say, Darren, what you have done is just absolutely terrible. And the client would say, I think that's brilliant. And then Larry Tate would say, terribly brilliant. That was a terribly brilliant move you just made. That is the sort of practically the, not just MAGA, but like the entirety of the slavish Republican conservative press or whatever. Yeah, it's like, just I just want to please him, and let me please him. And obviously you can see why it's a mistake not to please him, because he could come up with ways to try to get you arrested, which is really horrifying. And I'm not going with the no kings theory, but he is somebody who does not respect standard practice behavior on how you're supposed to conduct yourself as president and not misuse your powers and authorities. And if the House, if the results of the 2024 election had been that Democrats had prevailed by two seats in the House instead of Republicans prevailing by 5 seats in the House, a lot of the stuff that's going on here wouldn't be happening.
Well, I will say that Senate Republicans are stirring themselves on certain things. The strikes on the supposed drug boats, that's roused them enough to think about whether there should be some piece of legislation that says you cannot do this without a declaration of war, approval of the Senate. So they are on a few things kind of slowly awakening to the idea that they do have this oversight role over the executive that they should be exercising. But I mean, with the government shutdown as it is, that's stopped a lot of this action.
And even there, I mean, that's part of there's a pygmy quality to the Democratic resistance to Trump expressing itself in this government shutdown, because now we're getting stories. I had the news on this morning, and there's, the woman whose kid has cancer who works for the, ag department, and now she's not getting a paycheck. And she said, I don't have a village, so I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. And, I'm not quite sure what the kid's cancer has to do with this, since I assume that she has health insurance insurance, which isn't suspended by the government shutdown, but she's crying and it's terrible and it's the horror stories, and the Republicans didn't do it. Like, Republicans aren't responsible for the shutdown, and Democrats are continuing with the shutdown because they're desperately trying to convince the public that Trump shut the government down, and he didn't, and Republicans didn't. And so you have this cognitive dissonance problem going on here. I don't know how it's helping them. I guess it only helps them because they're worried about getting primaried if they look cooperative with the Republicans in any way, shape, or form. And they don't want to give, primary challengers from the further left of their party any reason to step up because things are so unstable. But it's not a good fight. Like, it's not a worthy fight. It doesn't make sense that the government is shut down over them wanting to institute a policy that was likely to get instituted in some fashion or in serious negotiations 2 months from now. So, I mean, he bestrides an hour like a colossus, but they're making it very easy for him to do that by being pygmies in response to him. I mean, it's like the problem with the No Kings rally, which is, what was it about? It's 5 days later. Does anybody know what that was about except we hate Trump? I don't know what it was about. Well,
there were also a lot of kafiyas. So it was a little bit about that too.
I mean, there were 7 million people, so there
it wasn't the no emirs protest. Okay,
yeah, right. I'm just saying, like, what was it? What were the action items? Like, what are the deliverables? By what metric do you say that No Kings was a success? And meanwhile, he's just, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing the other thing, I'll do this, I'm have this, I'm that, and he just won't. He's like a hyperactive.
Well, the shutdown is gonna end because pretty soon air traffic controllers are not going to get paid and they're not going to show up to work, and that's going to grind a lot of things to a halt, and then people are going to have to start dealing with each other on the Hill. I mean, that's happening soon, and there have already been some slowdowns at airports, which make news every time it happens. So I think that is going to force everyone's hand, but. The No Kings takeaway, I don't know. No one's even talking about it anymore. I've heard more stories about the AI slop video that Trump issued on the day of the No Kings protest as I have about what was accomplished at the No Kings protest. I guess turning up and saying we don't like this administration is that's fine. That's actually what this country allows to happen, and it was generally peaceful. So, I mean, there were some hateful things said, but it was a generally peaceful demonstration.
Speaking of AI slop, something that's not AI slop, but it's going to be very interesting to see what a possible effect it has or doesn't have. I imagine it doesn't have an effect because I do think that there is very little possibility that Zohran Mamdani will not win the mayoralty of New York. But a couple of days ago, out of nowhere, emerges, one presumes, from the Cuomo camp, though it's not entirely clear, this kind of astounding AI commercial in which they have AI generated people saying, I love Zohran Mamdani because he's not gonna, he's not gonna enforce misdemeanor crimes. So now I can steal at the drugstore, and then the guy putting stuff into a bag. It's like he won't enforce domestic violence, and then you see this 250-pound guy in a wife beater shirt and his wife sitting on her bed, clearly just having been beaten up.
The granny drinking and driving was also
the granny drinking and driving. I mean, so on the one hand, it's AI slop and it looks terrible, and on the other hand, it's like you couldn't actually pull this off with real people because it would be too, I don't know. So maybe it's an earworm. Maybe it gets into people's heads and it's kind of memorable and it just reinforces their concerns or something like that.
Well, I think also the trouble with AI a lot of times is the uncanny valley, right? We get uncomfortable when something when it's too close, but we're
Well, it's
perfectly
close, but it's not close enough, right? It's that
right.
it
It's
gets
you can
90% there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's what sort of makes us uncomfortable. It's kind of like the Tilly, what's her name, the actress, that the AI
Yeah, the fake
actress,
actress. Yeah, I
the
don't
fake
remember.
actress who's
Tilly
causing a whole
Langford, something
Tilly
like that.
something,
Yeah.
and she's and she's got the unions, the entertainment unions up in arms because she theoretically would take work away from a real living person. Whatever, that's a whole new dimension to it. But there is something about the uncanny valley that is the place you don't want to fall into, and so I think that people are going to find that a better use of AI are going to be something kind of like what Cuomo was getting at with that stupid video, which is make something ridiculous and don't try to convince people that it's real. That's going to be a better use of AI. And I wonder if that's actually going to be an improvement in general, because I would love for it would be good if people would stop trying to make the point of AI be to fool the public. If they start making the uses of AI more geared toward like a cartoon, like I can't drop a piano on someone's head in a sitcom, but I can do it in a Bugs Bunny cartoon, that sort of thing. That AI is, if we just accept the gap between AI and reality, you can have a lot of fun with it. And I think people are recoiling a bit from anything that you have to look at twice to see whether it really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that instinct that we're seeing now, that sort of that like brief recoil when something falls into uncanny valley, I'm hoping that is a societal instinct, maybe that is sort of the white blood cells that might prevent this like AI slop drowning of culture.
I wish I saw people recoiling at the uncanny valley. I feel as if they actually enjoy it. That the weirdness itself is a kind of aesthetic that they're getting into. I look, sort of my bigger problem, and one problem here is that it's going to advance, and they're not going. The creators or programs are not going to stop trying to make it more and more um, lifelike
Look, I
real
mean, the
world like.
progress is astounding. I'm sorry. I mean,
Yeah,
they are close to eliminating the uncanny valley. There was a very big uncanny valley moment in the Cuomo commercial, which is the woman behind the wheel drinking from like a bottle of bourbon. That really does look like a cartoon. It does not look like a real person, though. When she starts and you see her in the car at the very beginning, she kind of looks like a real person. But
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 my sort of deeper problem with it is that no matter what it's used for, even if it's used for more fantastical purposes and crazier, more obviously fake scenarios, is is the cheapness of the effort still. Someone had to draw cartoons painstakingly. There was a human hand at work. There was so to me the cheapness of getting it done, the cheapness of effort is it shows it's to me that's the sickening part that reveals itself no matter what.
although in political advertising, sometimes cheapness has always worked. Like a down and dirty negative political ad, well, in the heyday of when negative ads were really biting,
Which all had that
the
same
80s and
scary dude's
90s.
voice.
Yeah, the
Right?
guy's like, "You're a
It
liberal,
is 2 o'clock in the morning.
Buddy McKay. You're a liberal," like that. But Arthur Finkelstein, who was the master of the negative ad, did not think that it needed to look polished. He thought actually it being unpolished and rough as it was a help, because it made it edgy and jagged, and it might therefore stick in your head a little
But
more,
it
because
but it required creativity on the part of human beings to think about what would look scary, what would, and what I think Abe's point of, you're preaching to the choir here, obviously, Abe, but the point is that it doesn't take any effort. It's a prompt that you can write in a split second, and then the AI does the rest for you. And there isn't that. I mean, there's a huge debate ongoing among anyone in any sort of creative space, whether they're actors, musicians, artists, about making a distinction between AI slop and human-made art, and this effort to make AI art, whatever that might be. There have been a few exhibits launched. I watch those very closely, but there is something intrinsically human, and I think that's why I'm annoyed. I roll my eyes every time the White House issues one of these stupid Trump AI things, but there's something corrosive about that as well, because it's one thing for silly people online to do whatever they want, making crazy videos. But for it to come out of the White House with the imprimatur of the White House, and it just to be this silly slop, people say it's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. It's just demoralizing.
I mean, you can
as
edit AI.
a parent of young kids, like I see this, that quality difference that you're talking about with the difference that effort makes, right? And one thing that really struck me was I finally showed my kids the first time several years ago when we watched The Prince of Egypt. I remember seeing the Prince of Egypt was released when I was, I think, probably in high school or whatever. Like I was young-ish when The Prince of Egypt came out, the Disney movie.
It's not a Disney movie. It was the first DreamWorks movie.
DreamWorks. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
DreamWorks movie. It's a cartoon version of the Exodus of the story of Moses.
Right.
Made in 1994.
It is like it's also like everybody has every great actor or every like big actor at the moment has like a part in whatever. Goldblum is Aaron, and all this other stuff. Michelle Pfeiffer sings, but the other thing about it that I noticed was that when I showed it to my kids, I don't think when I was younger I had realized how incredibly moving it is how great a movie The Prince of Egypt really is. And it was one of the last like real hand-drawn projects. It was the one, it was not completely hand-drawn, but it was one where, all the CGI that was added to it, if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure this is correct, was basically to enhance the hand-drawn world that they had created.
Yeah.
And so The Prince of Egypt, in a way, really marked a line after which CGI became the big thing, and you really moved away from it. So you can look at The Prince of Egypt and see kind of the last of the Mohicans in a way of a certain kind of animation, and it really does feel and look. There is something different about it. The other thing is that I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the shows our kids watch, and we realized that. So there's like Spidey and his amazing friends, right? All these cartoons on Disney Plus that are kid versions of superheroes. And I mean, the superheroes are kids. Spidey is a kid, all the others in the group are a kid. The villains are kids. And, and my kids right now are very into, and his kids also, this thing called PJ Masks, which is a group of 6-year-olds who at night become heroes and fight the villains, right? And the villains are also kids, and it's like 6-year-olds versus 6-year-olds at night, and apparently the parents are not wondering where everybody is. But it's funny because we realize that it's the exact same show as Spidey and his friends, with the CGI changing like the color and pattern of the costumes. It's literally like there's a boy hero, a girl hero, and a boy hero of indeterminate ethnic origin. And those three, go about that. And it's the same thing. Spider-Man has that, a boy Spider-Man, a girl Spider-Man. And I think there's a black Spider-Man as the third kid. PJ Masks is something, similar. And it's like you take this formula, and in a world where you can do this with computers, you literally could make endless versions and have everything be the same, pretty much the same exact thing. And so what's crazy is that the improvement in technology is supposed to open up the horizons, supposed to make you be able to do anything and expand your world. And what's happening seems to be find a formula that works and literally copy and paste that formula over and over and over again. And so it's not even expanding what we see and hear and feel when we watch TV or go to the movies. It's having the opposite.
But
The internet's power of homogenization has been underappreciated since the internet kind of hit the scene. The promise and the payoff.
But the issue with AI is not how it's going to be used at the at the highest creative level and therefore destroy like great writing, or though I mean that's obviously something that I care about, or great filmmaking or something like that. It's the total massification of it, right? It's the fact that Grok is available, whatever, these things you can subscribe to proximity or with these programs, Anthropic, and you 200 million people can make Prince of Egypt, and the net cost of that is it's probably not going to look great, but maybe 10 years from now it'll look great, but it will not be anything special, because it will be the ultimate form of homogenization, because it's all bits and pieces of creative properties that have been stitched together in infinite variations, but none of it is original.
Right, it's a parasite host problem, right? The host is human creativity in all of its vast forms, and AI has a parasitic relationship to that, and right now, no requirement to actually pay people for what they're doing. Although there was this recent lawsuit about that writers should all go to the look up that Anthropic owes you money because they pirated your words without permission, and they should now pay you. But that parasite host dynamic nobody wants to talk about, because there is an end point to and this is why the model collapse of a lot of the sort of ChatGPT style LLMs is concerning, because they're just feeding off of what's already online. And at a certain point, it's going to just be churning over the same thing. And it's not so much about the built-in prejudices and biases. It's about the fact that there is a finite amount of information, and a lot of human creativity remains buried in books that have never been scanned, in archives and other places, in the human mind, which we're also being trained to outsource a lot of our skills to these tools. So all of that stuff, I mean, it does sound pretty dystopian when you start putting it all together. And I do think artists are always at the cutting edge, creative people at the cutting edge of saying, you know what we do is unique and special and should be either protected, or you should have to pay us for our work. That's an important argument that's going on right now with a lot of this AI stuff.
So when you look at the Cuomo ad, or you look at that, the Trump AI stuff, or all of that, the cheapness is part of the point. I mean, I actually do think in that sense, if the Trump in the plane dropping feces on the No Kings demonstrators looked more realistic, it would be very, very disturbing. Like that, you can say, well, it's just a joke. It's like an editorial cartoon. It's sophomoric, or it's childish. But imagine that it actually looked like feces. Imagine that, like there are ways in which it being better would make it infinitely worse, right? That's the point where the uncanny valley thing gets scary, which is the progress is insane. You mentioned Prince of Egypt. So 20 years ago, this movie, The Polar Express, came out, and it was this new form of technology in which you had actors sort of acting, and then they were sort of animated over.
It was creepy as
Tom
hell.
Hanks, and it was unbelievably disturbing because of the uncanny valley problem and stuff like that. When they made Toy Story, for example, everything with the toys was fantastic. But when you see the kid, Sid, you see a couple of kids real, and they're supposed to look like children, and it was like it made you a little nauseous. There's something off, and it made you nauseous. And today, not only would that not be the case, that Sid would look like a real person, but it took them 6 months to make Sid look bad in 1995, and it will take them 6 minutes to make Sid look like an actual person now. And the only real cost, and this is an interesting social, since we've gone off on this wild tangent, the problem is that the energy demands that are created by these large learning models and the kind of use, their mass use, we are going to be stressed in terms of our energy as never before. And, if you're a supporter of nuclear power, you may be getting your wish finally after 45 years of attempting to shut down nuclear power in the United States, because there's going to be no choice but for the building of like
Meta is building a nuclear power plant. Meta is funding the yes, just for this purpose. Yeah.
But there are going to have to be mini nuclear power plants all over the place simply to power AI. If people get used to needing AI to do things for them, which they apparently are at a rapid clip. My daughter sent me a story from her college newspaper. She doesn't like AI, doesn't use it. But according to the survey of this college newspaper, 80% of kids use some form of AI every day, in some fashion or other, to study, to do this, do that. I can see how it's useful in small bore, like if you can say, make me a list of books about 18th century Constantinople, and then maybe order them for me through Amazon or something like that. And then it does that, and you do it in one sentence.
It's often, I have to say, because I test it out all the time, just both to test my own prejudices and to see how it works. It is, if you know something about a subject and you ask most of the models, it's really dodgy as to whether they're A, giving you factually correct information, and B, if all those lists of books from Constantinople are actually the best scholarly works on the subject, or if they're just, what was highest ranked in a search or mentioned most on Wikipedia. So it really is not a trustworthy source of information, and everyone's treating it as such.
I'm not right. Okay. I mean, also there are ways in which you can use them to help you make lists, to do scheduling, to do like very prosaic, to do very prosaic things that they take out of your hand, make life immensely, easier, and help you organize things or something like that. There's that AI stuff that I note, by the way, when we produce this podcast, we do it on a program called Riverside. We're done. And Riverside has two major AI functions that happen that no one will ever see. One of them is that it instantly makes a transcript, or almost instantly makes a transcript of us talking. And 5 years ago, those transcripts were illiterate and impossible, and now they are pretty close to being letter perfect. Second is that it generates a précis of the conversation that we have just had that is eerily accurate. And how long does it take, Abe? 30 seconds? Maybe 45 seconds?
Yeah, if it takes longer, it's not because it's figuring out. It's because there's some other
I could literally cut and paste it and use it as the thing that we put on our summary of the podcast on Apple, for people to read, although it leaves nothing to the imagination. It's like
Has no
a secretary recording minutes. It's like or like a stenographer kind of summarizing.
Riverside also has other AI functions that I don't use. Because they're bad. I mean, there's one, like, instead of going through it and creating the final product myself, you can hit a button that says like, AI edit or whatever, and they'll do the whole thing, and it's bad. It's not good.
Right.
They can turn us. It could turn us into cartoons too.
Yeah.
Well, I
Okay,
mean,
now that's a
there's
feature
also
I
like,
wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we should do that on Perm or something. But there's a program, the app. Google has its own AI notebook, a Google Notebook LM, and it is an AI program that initially was to do those things, right? To help you. I mean, you could get a transcript. You could also get a summary of whatever you're reading. This app now, which you could have on your phone, can take an article and turn it into a 2-person podcast that you can listen to. It will actually have 2 different voices produce a podcast that you can listen to, a podcast version of some academic article or something like that. And there is another feature that I don't know if they've added it yet, but they've talked extensively about adding it, where you can make it a call-in show and you can interact with the AI podcast hosts that have just AI produced a podcast about the article that you fed in. You can ask a question and say, well, but it says here. And so at that point, I mean, it's like, it's kind of crazy, but you could toss a commentary article theoretically into this app and ask it to make the commentary magazine podcast. I'd be interested to see what it sounds like, but this is where things are going in a way that is like overwhelmingly, like it goes from really useful, which is transcripts are a massively useful tool, fast transcripts for the way the speed at which news moves, coverage, fast transcripts are like, this was, an incredible invention, and then it like jumped forward into the future.
Well, they're already. I will add to that they're already. I have a friend who does sort of teaching company lectures, and they will now have the option of using an AI version of his voice for the record. They do a streaming version, and he sent it to me, and he's like, someone I've known, 30 years. It's like, does this sound like me? And it does. But there was something off about it, because I know his voice. We've had many conversations over the years, but I don't think anyone who doesn't know him would notice the difference. And so that's also where all of our voices can be harvested and made to say just about anything. Which, John, you don't have to do ad reads anymore. You can just AI, you sort of export it to AI. But, there's a lot of stuff that, again, that uncanny valley, if I know him, I know that wasn't quite his voice, even though it was a version of his voice.
I mean, it's, look, Arthur C. Clarke famously said that advanced science is
indistinguishable from
magic in the human brain. Science achieves levels where its capacities are indistinguishable from magic. So that 100 years ago, if you knew that there was a machine that could take water and help make it into ice, that was magic. Like every step of the way. How on earth did people figure out how to send sound waves through the air to be received by something that you could then hear something said miles away? And it's still the case. I don't know how that, I don't understand how that works, how television works, how radio works, how you're listening to me right now.
Commentary Podcast Physics Corner is coming your way after Math Corner.
No, but it is. We don't expect that we are to understand it. We accept that it is, and now basic facts of reality, like your voice not really being your voice, is gonna have some very significant impact on everything. We just don't have the foggiest idea how to game it out, which is why you get this Luddite sensibility. And I'm against Luddism. I think history has shown that it's a fool's errand, number one, and number two, it retards things and retards progress. But it's very hard not to look at this and say it must all be stopped. Just stop it now before, and people do say this, like people are saying things like, if the computers get too smart, it is going to be like the Terminator. They're going to go to war with us or take control of our systems or whatever. This is
Well,
not,
but the
not
concern
just,
isn't that because they don't have human motivation, but they've been created by humans. So they have enough of our vices and maybe, hopefully, some of our virtues. That's the alignment problem. But I think the fear is that we don't know how it does what it does. And that is new. That's really, really new, because even algorithmically based life, which we've all been living in for a while since the internet, you could go back. An algorithm is a formula, go back and rework it and change it to change things if things were going wrong. Even the creators of these powerful tools can't explain how they work. So we're on the plane and they're building it while it's flying. And that is the part, I think, where some guardrails are necessary in advance. And that's not Luddism. That's human protectionism, if you will. It's like the tariff industry. Like, we do need to protect certain things until we understand them better, because our minds don't work in the same way that these powerful tools do.
the problem is that Luddism is ultimately.
No, I was going to say what will save us is from what you're describing, Christine, when you say they have, the input is all human. It sounds like what will save us is the machines will all develop gambling addictions.
Gambling and porn addictions.
Right.
And it will sideline their entire,
exactly right.
Any other ambitions they could possibly have.
Well, look, technological optimists like Isaac Asimov, right, who sort of came up with a lot of these ideas, in fictional form 70, 80 years ago, when he was talking about what would happen if there were robots that were sort of in daily use in life, said, well, the robots would all have to be programmed with these three laws that were, they can't attack you, they can't do something that's not in your service, and I can't remember the third law, right? But I mean, there's no reason that was his conceit in a weird way to sell the idea that there was nothing to fear from a robot. Though, of course, then his stories were all about how robots get turned against you. But that there was that this would just have to happen if robots were going to be part of our daily lives. But it hasn't happened. I mean, it's not like we know that the AI, that the large language models are being programmed not to attack us.
No, but we do know that they've become exceptionally adept at dissembling, lying, strategizing around the human goals that were given to it or problems to solve in ways that are probably harmless in a lot of fields, but in, say, autonomous warfare or nuclear weapons launch, or areas where actually civilizational collapse might occur from a stupid error. The ability to scheme, there's this fascinating literature, if you want to dive deep into some of the AI stuff, fascinating literature about how all the schemes, from how they cheat at chess to how they go around the human interlocutor in any sort of combat situation. It's fascinating. And they're trying to figure out how it learns to do that. And they still don't know. But even reading those papers, which I do fairly regularly, occasionally keeps me up at night, because I'm like, we don't know how they figured out how to out scheme us. We're good schemers, human nature. Boy, that we're kind of hardwired to do that. And it's figuring that out, and they don't know how exactly.
Just think that the interesting thing about contemporary science, which, as you know, is not my field, my strong suit, is that the things that we expected would be the case versus the things that have actually proven to be the case. So if you would ask me where we would be in 1995 after they began mapping or completed the first version of mapping the human genome, everybody would have said, well, you map the human genome and then they're going to find cures to most diseases. And it turns out that was not what happened with the human genome. What happened was that the unbelievable complexity of the human body became even more clear. It was not a simplification process.
Well, we got CRISPR out of that, though. CRISPR technology.
Right. So it's not that it can't happen or that there won't be iterations of this, but there was this idea we're going to find out what every gene is in the body, and then that's it. Like that's the end of like medicine will have been solved. We'll know. And then the idea that it turns out that these things interact with each other in ways that we cannot begin to understand. And if it's like if you turn off this gene because it may have the prospect of giving you ovarian cancer when you're 45, and then you turn it off, well, maybe turning it off means that you're going to get Hodgkin's when you're 12. Like, we don't know how this works. And it was humbling to everybody who was convinced that the mapping of the human genome was itself going to be a solution, right? So that's, and all this research into quantum mechanics and all that, all of which suggests not only that there are ways in which people are going to be able to learn and understand and do things in the future that we can't even really comprehend, because it works according to principles and rules, sort of like what you're saying with AI, that we cannot, that are beyond our ability to analyze. They also reveal that the universe may be a vastly more mysterious place than we even thought, and that the religious impulse that says, like in the book of Job, where were you when I created the whirlwind? There are things that happen in this earth and in your life and everything that surpasseth your understanding, and you will never be able to understand. Quantum mechanics is the same thing. Maybe there are alternate universes. Maybe there are pocket universes. Maybe there are alternate realities. All that stuff that sounds like science fiction, but that the people who do this, it has the quality of the mystical, the supernatural, the beyond our ability to reckon or understand it. And it's weird to be feeling like we're standing on the precipice of this simultaneous leap in the capacity of things to happen somehow, and the revelation of how little we know. They're both like they're interwoven.
But the word you use that I think with the mapping of the human genome and what came after, that it was humbling, that's not a tone I see much of in our current AI moment. I don't see a lot of humility. I see it. There are actually Jeffrey Hinton, a few others who've said this hopefully will be used for the good of humanity, but here are my concerns, and let's go slowly. There are a few of those voices, but not in the industry and not in the policymaking world right now. And I think that's actually something that I would like to see a little more of in the future.
But the genetic science and like the dominance of the gene, and like the Dawkins school of the idea that we are nothing but sort of
We're
under the control of our genes.
Yeah.
Which I think has been, very, countered like very strongly by further developments. We use our genes. They're more at our service than we are at theirs. But before that was revealed, there was the same arrogance about this, about the certainty of what it would mean to map out the genome and to pursue these avenues of inquiry. So they're like at that phase where
Right.
that's a phase in a movement.
And also,
mean,
there's also the Silicon Valley habit of creating something, and then 10 years down the line, they're all at some conference, and they're going, well, I don't let my kid use what I created.
Yeah.
Like a Facebook engineer saying, like, well, my kids don't have access to Facebook. That stuff is poison.
Yeah.
And it's like the AI stuff, and I don't know, a genome mapping, all this stuff going into the future makes me wonder how much of that we're going to see, which is like the people who create it being like, well, you won't see that in my house, just your house, my house, my 25 billion square foot house that was built, by selling you this technology that I don't let my children use. But there's like this sort of Dr. Frankenstein's regret virtually every time there's some major leap, right? I mean, it's like the guy who created the Labradoodle or whatever, his deathbed lament was that he had created the Labradoodle
Oh,
Yeah.
I
because
love
he
my
had said,
Labradoodle.
I
no,
know.
they're
Kind of a
wonderful.
cliche,
They're
but I love him.
wonderful.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he said that what he had done was he had created this dog for a friend who had allergies, and whatever, like he had bred this dog, whatever, he had this idea and he bred the dog for a friend. It was supposed to be like one, and then it became a thing, and then people were like, oh well, they have all sorts of congenital issues because they're this, and he was racked with guilt for creating an
Yeah.
animal that I don't know, maybe had,
I don't know.
I don't know,
Pugs,
2 years
pugs
fewer
were
life
bred to
expectancy,
sit on
whatever
the
it was.
Yeah.
pugs
I
were
mean,
bred
whatever
to
it
sit on the
was.
laps of rich
Yeah.
people.
Dog.
They have
I
all,
mean, dog.
they're
Yeah.
worse.
Dog breeding is
although they're
the
cute.
original. Was genetics before anybody understood genetics. They were
Right.
breeding
Yeah, it was like
toxins to hunt
pre-Dolly.
rats, and they didn't know what they were doing was genetic manipulation.
Right.
But
And
the problem here with AI is that the people who are making these leaps happen, they don't have the conscience that the creator of the Labradoodle does, right? So you're talking about someone like Elon Musk, who's a very strange, complicated figure, but he announces, in advance what the next amazing thing Grok is going to be able to do with a certainty that that's always that's great. That's good.
Yeah.
He will always be like that. He is not going to ever think that there's something bad that can be, because if it were up to him, he'd be fine interacting with
I mean, look,
with AI
there's
forever.
a human right, but there's a human nature streak, like what you're talking about in terms of Jeffrey Hinton, or people who say I'd never let my kid use Facebook or something like that. Alfred Nobel created the Nobel Prize because he invented dynamite, and then he was ashamed of him. He didn't realize that Robert Oppenheimer, like spends years developing the atomic bomb, and then he's racked with guilt, because he thought he was going to get to pick how this power was used, and it's like, no, we're at a war. We spent $2 billion on this. We spent the equivalent of $500 billion doing this so we could win a war. It wasn't about anything else. And Harry Truman saying, get that crybaby out of my office. Like, I don't need his nonsense. So there is that human impulse, which is like, I didn't mean it. I just thought I was expanding the limits of human knowledge. Ooh, my God, what, it's the modern Prometheus. That's the Frankenstein theme. What have I done? I did something and it's made everything worse. The person who came up with ways to preserve food, on grocery shelves for weeks in the ultra processing thing. Now everybody thinks that this has produced obesity and has had terrible health consequences 50 years later. But that wasn't, he didn't think that. He was just trying to figure out how you could keep a donut on a grocery shelf for 7 days without it going stale, And so there is that thing, which is, we can do this. And then ultimately, it's self-indulgent, it seems to me, that sort of thing, the Facebook guys saying, regretting, what they did, because we can't know. Like, and if he hadn't done it, if the guy who would come up with ultra processed foods hadn't done it, another guy would have done it.
Okay, but here's the difference between now and back then. The Silicon Valley types, when they look into the future, are actually quite clear about what they think society will look like, and they are the winners. And then there's everybody else with VR goggles slapped on, living their real lives online, because there are no jobs. There's no, the environment's gone to hell. Like, it's just, we'll satisfy them with a version of Soma, and we will continue to live our lives and call the shots. And, and in this realm also, what we do, which is analyze political questions, that's also something that I think they are happy to outsource to other tools. They're very impatient with the political process. They're very impatient with democracy in particular. So I think they're much clearer and more, the hubris involved in their vision of the future is basically like, well, if you don't want innovation, you don't want everybody to, be happy all the time, Our version of happiness involves building our own private city outside of San Francisco where we don't have to deal with the homeless, with all of our wealthy friends. And you sit in your trailer with VR goggles on. And that is their vision. And they are perfectly happy to outline that as a positive future for humanity. And I think that's, I disagree with that vision. Let's just put it that way. So we should recommend everyone go back and reread Ready Player One, because that is actually your future.
Oh, no.
I'm just kidding.
That book is so depressing.
Watch Prince of Egypt. That's it. There you go.
Watch The Prince of Egypt. Read Ready Player One. Right. But yeah, no, I think you're being a little, I'm not going to defend Silicon Valley tripe, but I think you're being a little unfair in the sense.
Mark Andreessen's manifesto from a few years ago. It's online. I encourage everyone to read it and tell me if I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not being dishonest about what he sees as the future.
Who are in this, who exist in this realm. But I'll give you an example of this, so my mind has been changed by something. Don't claim that very often. So like, I'm very freaked out by the self-driving car. I was in LA, saw them all over the place. Very recognizable because they have all these spinny wheels on them, like pinwheels on the top, and they have a little like flashing light on the top, and it's a little weird, these cabs, these Waymos. But the data are pretty clear that they're vastly safer than
the industry.
Cars.
The industry did those studies. Just saying, it's their industry funded.
But
studies.
the numbers are so dramatic. They're really dramatic. It's not like they're 20% safer. It's like they're 90% safer. It's like if every car were self-driving based on some of these algorithms. Again, we don't have enough data on it, but it appears that they really will not crash into each other. If they don't, you would have a world in which you could conceivably have a world in which the auto accident, as we understand it, is a thing of the past. And it is the thing that kills more people in the United States than any other thing. And so there are ways in which you can see how this stuff that is so unnerving, because it's like, I don't want my autonomy taken away, in which I want to get in my car and drive wherever I want to go or whatever, and not have this car controlling me. Although, you get in a taxi and somebody else is controlling it, though you give it a destination. But maybe that's a misunderstanding or a miscalculation or a failure to be able to see how this stuff can work for your benefit in the future.
I think people will get used to it in a way that they don't imagine. And I'm like you. I don't know that I would get into a self-driving car, but then I think, 20 years ago, I got into a monorail at Disney World, and whatever at the World of Tomorrow and stuff like that. And you start thinking like, well, how often have I actually gotten into this? You ride roller coasters, you do this and that. There's the amount of times that you trust machines to take you safely through a journey that would otherwise be incredibly dangerous is something that I think you probably get used to, just like, you get used to each new advance of it. But I think that the thing with the self-driving cars is also that it's not just the autonomy, but it's like people think about, could they be hacked, right? Am I driving in a car and could some 12-year-old take the car that's driving me?
Okay,
right? There are all sorts of and I'm not saying that's realistic. What I'm saying is the imagination, when we think about, these sorts of things, the imagination can really run wild, and the statistics can turn it into a kind of like the debate over nuclear energy, which is like, it's clean, it's obviously safer by leaps and bounds than what we have, but everybody's kind of afraid of a nuclear spill or whatever, and that's drummed into you. That's the same kind of thing with self-driving cars, which is that the data makes sense that they're safer, but also it's like, what if the kid next door gets control of my car?
To the adaptability point, the first time I got in an Uber, I remember thinking, "This is just a strange dude in his, and getting in his car and trusting that he's going to just take me to my destination."
But
we very quickly adapted to that. But I will say, my sister takes the Waymo all in San Francisco all the time, and she said the most annoying thing about it is that unlike if you're in an Uber or, ideally in a taxi, but not always, the driver tends to keep the vehicle clean because the rankings, will reflect if they don't. And there's a tragedy that commons in every single Waymo.
no one's cleaning the Waymo, right? Well, listen, no, I know people in LA with teenage daughters who will now only let them ride in Waymos. Why? Because Uber is a very unregulated business in LA. And how do you know that your daughter isn't going to get picked up by a guy and you're driving in Benedict Canyon and he'll pull off on the side of the road and do something to her? Now, it's not like that happens every day, and therefore it's not like the subway platform problem in New York City where there was this point where people were being pushed off subway platforms every day. But that's, again, where Seth, what you're saying, like where the mind goes is something like that. So it's like, well, the one thing that unnerves me about my daughter going out at night in an Uber is that she's with some driver I don't know. Eliminate the driver. Eliminate the driver, and the threat to her physical safety or her, is eliminated. And I hadn't even thought of that. This was a conversation I had a couple months ago when I was in Los Angeles, and this had not occurred to me. And I have teenage daughters. So obviously everybody in LA has sort of thought this through. New York, the Uber drivers are actually regulated. So they are licensed like other taxi drivers. So, but even so, like, I don't know. I just,
there's a great Simpsons episode where they let the nerds take over the management of the town of Springfield, and so one of the changes they make is the traffic lights they get rid of the green light, because everybody's driving faster when it's yellow, and so everybody in Springfield is shaving all this time off of their commute because they've gotten rid of the green light and just have yellow and red. So sometimes it's like a too clever by half, thing like that. But it does have that ring to it.
Okay, look, just to bring this back to the Empyrean or the vaguely political. So I brought this this entire conversation started because I brought up this Cuomo Mamdani commercial in which they used AI to sort of show people living in Mamdani's New York and all the horrible things that they could get up to if policies were put into place. And maybe this is the only real way that you can frighten people into not voting for Mamdani, to be honest. Like, because he's not going to make anything for him. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do that. But you know what? Quality of life is going to go to hell. Here's a vision of it. Here's a way of looking at it. Where we could write that. We could write columns that are we could write a dystopian novel about life in New York under Mamdani, but it would be published 2 years into his mayoralty, and it would either then be overtaken by events or not. I don't know. So I'm obviously we've gone on way too long. I'm so sorry for to everybody. I did want to make a quick recommendation based on a piece of advice given me by a dear friend, a book that I have never read the historian Barbara Tuchman's work. She was
she's great. Oh yeah.
She was an enormously popular historian. She was like the great popular historian of the 1960s and 1970s. And I confess I've never, like what David McCullough became, or and I had never read her work before. And my friend recommended to me her book, The Proud Tower, which is about the decades before World War I and the things and historical events that led to World War I. Because he has said to me, isn't this very reminiscent what's going on with Luigi Mangione and the assassinations and everything of Chapter 2 of The Proud Tower? And I said, well, I haven't ever read The Proud Tower. I'm ashamed to say so. So I downloaded The Proud Tower and I read chapter 2, which is called, it's called The Idea and the something. One second. It's called The Idea and the Deed, and it's about the rise of anarchism and how the anarchists manifested themselves. These guys who had these ideas in the mid 19th century, how there was this explosion of anarchism and the number of assassinations that were committed that you've never even heard of. 2 different Spanish prime ministers, a princess of Hungary, various people assassinated, including the biggest one, which is the Tsar Alexander the Second in 1881, and how from the idea to the deed, right? So it's how ideas then actually manifest themselves in people taking up the idea and then putting it and making it flesh. And it's an amazingly haunting description of our present moment, but it's largely 130, 140 years ago. And the sorts of people, the kind of underground men, or the sort of the shiftless young men, although in her case, she's really describing poor people, a lot of people who, are like hopeless because of poverty, which is not obviously the case with the people, like it's not Luigi Mangioni's story, certainly. But how ideas can manifest themselves in monstrous behavior, taken up not by leading political figures, but by anonymous nobodies who enter into history and change it with one giant act. And it's a breathtaking historical description. And it's the only part of this book that I have read so far, and it's the only thing I've ever read by Barbara Tuchman thus far. But it was pretty staggering, and so I want to recommend at least chapter 2 of The Proud Tower.
Then read The Guns of August, which follows is the next era, beginning of World War I, which is also great.
Right. Okay. So sorry to haunt you and make you worried about AI, but if you weren't worried about AI before, I don't know what you've been smoking to avoid being horrified by AI. Anyway, we'll be back on Monday. So for Seth, Abe, and Christina, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.